So everybody has a calorie number now. And what we've done here is actually a pretty simplistic approach to calculating your calorie needs. As we just saw, your calories out is going to be highly variable based off of a number of different factors. So the thing is, unless you jump into a metabolic ward, which would be very expensive, and do some indirect calorimetry in order to determine how much energy you actually expend, it's going to be really difficult to actually know exactly what your calorie needs are, but this is going to be a very good estimate for the most part. I do a little bit more calculation with my one-on-one clients, but generally when I do both this and my calculations, they're close enough. And the thing is, this is an experimentation process. So you're going to see if this works, and if it doesn't work, you can adjust. All right, but it should work. All right, so the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna calculate our protein needs. So I do this separately from fat and carbohydrate, the other two macronutrients, because as far as active populations go, we have higher protein needs. The reason that we have higher protein needs is, let's just talk about how your body breaks down protein first. You get protein from food. You got a nice juicy steak, you eat it, your body is then going to break it down into amino acids, which are the building blocks of protein. We've got, oh no, how do I go back now? There we go. We've got amino acid pools in our body. So after our body breaks down the protein, if it doesn't have an immediate need for it, it's got these little storage containers, these amino acid pools, that it can put the amino acids in until all of a sudden it has a need for them. And all these amino acids are unique. We have there's 9 essential amino acids, and they're essential because your body cannot make them, it can only get them from diet. So the thing is, we're going to store the ones that we don't have an immediate need for, and then eventually we'll have a need for it. When we have a need for it, our body is going to immediately use it. So these amino acid pools are essentially like a pool, like a tub with a drain open. Because the thing is, as somebody who exercises, you're breaking down your tissues and your body's constantly rebuilding them. So it has a much higher need for these amino acids, especially the essential ones. So in order to keep these pools full and make sure that our body has an ample supply of amino acids to actually restructure your body, we need to get enough in from diet. So especially for all of you active people, eating enough protein is going to be really important. So studies have shown that if you are on a calorie deficit, so you are trying to lose body fat, if you eat enough protein, and we'll talk about what enough protein is, you will not lose muscle mass. You might even be able to gain muscle mass if you're doing everything right. You're sleeping right, your stress is low, you're exercising in a way that's going to build muscle. I've had clients at this gym who have put on significant muscle while losing fat. It's an uncommon result. Most of the time, if you're losing fat, you can maintain your muscle mass, not really gain it unless you're doing everything right. But as long as you're eating enough protein, that's why it's the second most important thing. Eat enough calories, eat enough protein. You get those two things right, your body composition is going to be great. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to figure out what our minimum protein need is. So we're going to multiply our body weight by 0.82 if you're active and you want to gain mass. We're going to multiply our body weight by somewhere between 0.82 to 0.9 if you're active and you want to improve your performance or maintain your weight. And then if you're looking to lose some fat and you're active, and everyone in here is active, you're going to multiply your body weight by 0.9 to 1. Okay, and that's going to give you what your minimum protein intake is. And this is based off of the research out there that looks at, okay, if you're on a calorie deficit, essentially how much protein do you need to be eating in order to maintain or gain muscle mass? Because that's really what we want to do if we're losing fat. So we'll do that calculation now and then just write that number down. Let's try to get that done within a minute. All right, so write that number down. The next thing that we would end up doing is we would look at our protein as a percent of total calories. Don't need to do a calculation here because eventually I'm going to tell you that you're going to have to keep a food journal, and MyFitnessPal will do it for you. So just knowing that if you want to gain mass, that about 25% of your calories adjusted for minimum intake is what you're going to be doing for protein. 30% if you're looking to maintain your current mass, perform better at that mass, or 35% of total calories if you're looking to lose fat. and then you adjust that based off of the minimum. So let's say that if you're looking to lose fat, but 35% of your total calories is less than this number up here, then you're going to change the percent of protein to whatever makes this your minimum amount of protein. All right. Step 3 is we are going to look at carbohydrate and fat needs. So like I said over and over, calories and protein, you get those two things right, it's nice and easy, then you are going to make good body composition changes. From there, dialing in the carbohydrate and fat is going to be some serious icing on the cake. It's really just going to take your results up a notch. So again, based off of your goal, you're gonna choose what your percentage of carbohydrates should be and what your percentage of fat is gonna be. So just looking at your sheet here, just circle whatever macronutrient ratio is correct for you. All right, everybody got that figured out? Cool. Now that you know what the quantity of energy, so calories you need to eat is, and now that you know roughly what the percentage breakdown of that needs to be from protein, fat, and carb, we're gonna talk about the actual process of how to count macronutrients. So first we'll talk about why you should count your macros. So first thing first is that counting your macros is essentially just a fancy way to count calories in a way, because protein and carbohydrate have 4 calories per gram and fat has 9 calories per gram. So if you eat the right amount of macronutrients, then that is going to in total add up to the right amount of calories. By eating enough protein, it's gonna make sure that if you are trying to lose fat, that you are actually maintaining your muscle. And if you are trying to gain mass, it's gonna make sure you've got enough protein, enough raw material to actually gain muscle mass versus just fat. By controlling your carbohydrate intake, it's gonna make sure that you're not eating so much carbohydrate that you are storing some as fat, but it's going to make sure that you are eating enough carbohydrate that you've got good store for it in your muscle. So when you come in here and you work really hard, you've got some energy, you're gonna perform your best, and you're not just gonna completely hit a wall energy-wise because you don't have actual physiological energy stores. As far as fat goes, really, you don't want to be on a very low fat diet, because then your nervous system function, your brain function might kind of crap out, and then your steroid hormones and sex hormones levels might drop. So by making sure that you're eating enough fat, you're really making sure that you've got healthy function in all those areas. Also, it's pretty easy and it does not prohibitively restrict any food choices. So let's say that right now you really eat a bunch of poor quality foods, for example. You can fit those poor quality foods into the right quantity, and you can save making quality food changes for later when that's a little easier. Like for example, if you're really addicted to sugary foods, it's really hard to break the addiction cycle. So if I told you that that's the first thing that you need to do, you might just completely lose motivation right away. You might get really frustrated with that process, and it becomes very difficult. But if you dial in your calories, you dial in your macronutrients, all of a sudden you're able to eat the foods that you normally eat just in the right quantities, and you start seeing some changes in your body. That is what will probably motivate you to take more of a long-term behavior-based or habit-based approach. So this, counting the macros, I found, is a way to help you see the changes that you want to see, and then that keeps you motivated to continue learning about what changes you can make to really dial things in further. So the first thing that you need to do in order to count your macros is establish your daily macronutrient goals. So we've already done that. These are the ratios here. You adjust it for minimum protein intake that we calculated. Step 2 is to add up the macronutrients that are in the food that you eat throughout the day. I do not recommend doing this pen and paper or in your head. I have one client who I don't know how he does it, but he just keeps a note in his iPhone and just essentially knows the macronutrient breakdown for each of the foods that he does and does it pen and paper. I don't know why he does that versus MyFitnessPal, but It's pretty impressive. But what you want to do is you want to download MyFitnessPal. It's an app on your phone, or you can go to myfitnesspal.com and set up a account there. MyFitnessPal has a very robust database of all the different foods that you might want to eat. They've got nutrition information for a lot of restaurants that you might eat. All of the Power Supply meals, if you order from Power Supply, are in there. All of the Ice Age meals, if you get Ice Age meals, are in there. RX bars, all these different things, they're in there. And it becomes easier to use as you use it. So don't do pen and paper for counting your macros. Use MyFitnessPal. It is so simple. It adds up all of the calories and macros in the foods that you eat. It is the easiest way to do this. We are living in very fortunate times that we have technology to do these things for us. So each day, what you're gonna do is you're gonna put exactly how much you eat in the app. So for the next week from now, I want you just to eat normally. What that's gonna do is it's gonna give you an idea about what your current eating habits look like in terms of your calorie intake, in terms of your protein intake, in terms of your carbohydrate intake, and in terms of your fat intake. So eat normally, don't change anything except for the fact that you're putting it into MyFitnessPal. That's gonna give you what your current eating habits template looks like in terms of calorie and macronutrient breakdown. You can then compare that to what we've calculated today, and you might realize I don't eat anywhere near enough protein. And that's generally the theme that I see with new clients, is they don't eat enough protein. So then all of a sudden you can start to think about behaviors or habits that you might form in order to eat more protein. And that's how you can kind of take this do-it-yourself approach using MyFitnessPal. So the app is gonna keep track over the next week of how many calories, fat, protein, and carbohydrate you've been eating each day, and you should kind of get a rough average. You should kind of understand what your weekly template looks like, and then weekend will probably be a little different. Most people actually either under or overeat on the weekends. Step 3, if you don't hit your macros, so not this week, but let's say next week, you decide that you're gonna make a change, and you don't really hit your macros, just review your food journal. Realize, I tried to eat more protein, but I still didn't hit my number. Just hop back into your food journal and be like, okay, what meal am I kind of missing some protein? And for the most part, I see that people, for the most part, we'll get to it in a minute, I see that people actually struggle with getting enough protein in at breakfast, because we have this idea ingrained in our head that like bacon and eggs are the only protein sources that you can eat at breakfast. But both of those protein sources have pretty much an equal or more amount of fat than they do protein. So most people, they'll eat a ton of eggs, they'll eat a ton of bacon, and they've not really eaten that much protein, and they've pretty much eaten all their fat for the day at breakfast. So, you can kind of be like, okay, maybe there's a different way to get protein in at breakfast, because I'm not getting enough protein at breakfast. So doing that review process is one of the most important parts of macro counting, is going back, looking at what your habits look like, and determining what the step is or the behavior is that you can implement in order to get a little bit closer to your ideal calorie and macronutrient intake. So we're gonna talk about some of the reasons that calorie and macronutrient counting fails, and then based off of that, how you can kind of correct course if you see yourself going in any of these directions. So the first problem is learning the macro language. So right now you might not necessarily understand what the macronutrient breakdown of certain foods are. I know for me, when I was kind of in my beginner phase, I thought that peanut butter was a great source of protein. And although peanut butter does have protein for a plant food, it is mostly fat. Most people think like nuts, they're a great source of protein, but really they're a great source of fat with some protein in them. Or for vegetarians, it's like, beans are a great source of protein. And yes, as far as vegetarian protein sources go, they're great, but they are a carbohydrate source with a good amount of protein in them. So you're gonna start to learn the macronutrient language here. You might think bacon is meat, so that means it's protein, but really it's a lot of fat with some meat on it. So it's got some protein. So you eventually, at first you might not understand the macro language. You might think, I need to add some protein, and you might add peanut butter or bacon or something like that, and realize, oh no, I just added protein, but a ton of fat. So over time, learning the macro language is just something that you need to do. So pay attention in MyFitnessPal. I highly recommend that for at least a month, you weigh and measure your food, so you start to develop an eye for, okay, this is what a 4-ounce portion of meat looks like, for example. And then also pay attention to MyFitnessPal and realize a 4-ounce portion of, let's say, chicken is going to be 28, 30 grams of protein and 5 grams of fat, whereas a 4-ounce portion of ground beef might be 20 grams of protein and 10 grams of fat. And you'll eventually start to understand a little bit better what the food on your plate is in terms of its energy content and its macronutrient breakdown. So I took this little screenshot here. You know, if I have a healthy breakfast of 4 eggs, a cup of zucchini, olive oil, and a kiwi, you know, you might think, oh, 4 eggs, that's a lot of protein. But really, I'm only getting about 25 grams of protein in from the eggs. And let's say some of you probably saw in your calculations that you might need 150 plus grams of protein per day. You know, if I'm only eating 3 meals, the math just doesn't work out. So I need to figure out another way maybe to get some protein in at that meal. So this process of looking at your MyFitnessPal and figuring out which foods you can insert at different times is really important. The second problem with macro counting is that it doesn't control your nutrient timing, and it also doesn't control the quality of foods. So we're not gonna really dive into that today because those are a little bit more advanced concepts. Like I said, calories and protein first. That's your first priority. Second is getting the rest of the macronutrients, getting your protein, fat, and carbohydrate dialed in. From there, getting your timing right is going to provide a little bit extra return, but it's a little bit more of an advanced concept. And then dialing in the quality of your foods is also going to take it a little bit further, but they're not going to have the impact that calories and protein will initially. So if you end up wanting to learn more about nutrient timing, this is a pretty accessible book. Actually, my neighbor growing up was Robert Portman, the PhD who wrote this, which was really cool to figure out because I read this book and I was like, was that my neighbor that wrote this book? And turned out, yes, it was. It was him and Dr. John Ivey. And this is essentially the, this was one of the first books on the concept of nutrient timing to really take a look at all the research that was out there and compile it. If you are into reading some more academic type of stuff, one of my favorite researchers, Alan Aragon, and his colleague, Brad Schoenfeld, they did an update. So they revisited nutrient timing. This book was published early 2000s. So in relative recent history, they took a look at all of the new research that's come out since. They did a meta-analysis and they updated things. It's actually, even though it's published in academic journals, both of them do a really good job of writing in a way that is accessible even to the layperson. So, you know, if you want to learn more, those are the 2 resources that I would recommend diving into. And then as far as quality goes, there's a lot that you can do with quality, but we won't dive into that now. Problem number 3 with macro and calorie counting is that it's a diet and 90% of diets fail. So the reason that most diets fail, I already told you. It's like if I give Rami a meal plan and she follows the meal plan to a T today, but then tomorrow she's going out to dinner with her coworkers. So the meal that I wrote for her for dinner is going to be different than the meal that she eats. So that throws her off. Or, all of a sudden she's traveling and she can't eat the 5 meals that I asked her to eat because she's on a plane for however long. So I'm asking her to completely change her habits and go on a diet, essentially. So when you're done, you might have followed the meal plan most of the way, got some good results, but then all of a sudden, what do you do after? She's either essentially dependent on me to continue writing meal plans for her, or she's just going to fall off and go back to whatever habits make sense for her. She might have felt restricted during the meal plan, so she might go towards foods that she felt restricted on and just kind of be like, oh, I'm gonna treat myself. I just lost a bunch of weight. And then the treat yourself becomes this slippery slope of treat yourself, treat yourself, treat yourself. So that's one of the issues with diets here. As far as the calorie and macro counting goes, if you take kind of like the flexible dieting approach and you allow yourself to eat some lower quality foods, you might not have felt as restricted, but the thing is you might get frustrated with having to keep a food journal. You might get frustrated with having to count the calories and macronutrients. So, if you think about this as, again, changing your habits, then you won't get frustrated with the habits that you formed. They become second nature. And eventually you can kind of depart from the counting the calories and counting the macronutrients on a regular basis. For me, I usually just for 1 month out of the year, or whenever I'm changing pace in my training season, that's when I'll count my calories and macronutrients, just to kind of recalibrate myself, understand what portions of different foods I need to eat, and see kind of, okay, let's calibrate. How have my habits shifted, and what are they looking like in terms of calorie and macronutrient breakdown? Then I can make changes, and then I just kind of ride those habits for 3 months, 6 months, or an entire year. So, you again, use it as a template to change habits, and then it won't become a diet, and it is going to be way less likely to fail. Another thing that you can do is you can read the book The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. It is a little bit long in terms of it's going to kind of just beat a dead horse. You can read probably the first 60 pages of it and understand the basic concepts, and really get a feel for the actual way that you can engineer good habit changes. But if you again take a habit-based approach, a behavior-based approach, the results are going to last longer. It's not going to feel like a diet. And I think that this book is a good book to kind of ingrain in your brain how to actually take a habit change-based approach to things.